Good morning, Pankhurst, and welcome to your first Talk for Writing lesson this week. And this week we are in week 4 of our remote learning, and the date today is Monday, 25th January 2021. So our learning objective today is, can I learn the text map and key vocabulary? So now that we have finished writing our non-chronological reports, we are going to be starting a new unit today. And because it's a new text map, that means we are starting to look at a new text. So this week and next week, we are going to be looking at recounts. A recount is when you tell someone about something by giving an account of an event or an experience. We will be looking at this book here. It's a diary written by a Victorian housemaid called Jane Pinny. And this is a fiction text. Does anyone remember what a fiction text is? Fantastic. So a fiction text is a made-up story. So this housemaid isn't a real housemaid, a real life person. It's a made-up character. So she's a made-up housemaid, okay, in the Victorian times. Our new text map is going to be a part which is from a chapter in this book. Okay, I am going to read that chapter to you now, and the chapter is from pages 144 to 157. Whilst I read the chapter, I want you to pay a lot of attention to how the pages look and how it's set out. Okay, so if you just bear with me a second, I'm going to get the book ready for you now. So I'm going to start reading this chapter for you, and this chapter is day 46. This has been a most extraordinary day. Mr. Sherlock Holmes himself couldn't have done better. The master's brother, Major Kirby Trott, has asked to use a certain room as his study while he's here, not wanting to do his correspondence and such like in the family library. Apparently, he dictates his letters to Mahesh rather than writes them himself. Dictates means that he says what he wants to say in his letters and Mahesh writes them for him, like I does with Plump for his diary. Never knew I was dictating. Turns out that Mahesh can write better English than what most of us downstairs can, except, of course, for Mr. Pitchard. And in the most beautiful writing too. The only writing I've ever done is with chalk on a slate or in pencil on a scrap of paper. And once with a dip pen, but Mahesh uses something called a fountain pen. It doesn't spurt like a fountain, though I'd bet I'd get blotches and splodges and the like all over me and the paper if I tried. But the ink flows regular from it, and in Mahesh's hand, the end result is beautiful. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was ordered to assist Mahesh in preparing the room as a study. I was told to gather together any papers I found with writing on them and put them aside for the master, and to provide plenty of paper with the Lytton House letterhead, as well as make sure that inkwells were full and the like. I wasn't sure why me. I mean, I was the room. Yes, the room is on the ground floor where all the rooms that are my responsibility are found. But why couldn't Mahesh do it? Not that I minded. I like a change. I heard poor old Jack use a word the other day when he were asked what it's like being on unpaid light duties. What with his broken leg? He told him it was monotonous. And when I asked Cook what he meant, she told me it means doing the same boring stuff day in, day out, which just about describes my life. So there I was, tidying away, when I noticed something odd about the fireplace. There was coal laid out and ready to burn should it be needed, but it had not been lit. But lying on top of the unused coal were a fragment of paper charred at the edges. Someone must have set fire to the bigger piece and dropped it in the fireplace to burn, and this was all that remained of it. So there's a little picture of the housemaid. I picked it up, and on it were the words, "Oppie of jade necklace, add rom soapstone by £1, 3 shillings and 6 pence only." And underneath were some numbers which I reckon to be a date. Now, as you knows, dear diary, reading ain't my strong point, but I knows pounds, shillings and pence when I sees them. And I also likes looking in them department store catalogues of clothes, which has everything from our maids' uniforms to the finest dresses. So I knows the word lace and I knows the word neck. And I knows when you put them together, you get necklace. This burnt scrap of paper was about a necklace, and not just any necklace, a jade necklace, spelled like Major Kirby Trott's younger daughter. And the only jade necklace I've ever heard talk of in these parts is the missing one now found. And I knows the word soap well enough. I've seen it stamped on the great big bars that Miss McNamara has us slice into smaller cakes of soap. But put all them words together, and what's it all about? I slipped the paper in the pocket under me pinny. This was a clue. If ever there was one. If ever there was one. A moment later, Mahesh came in carrying a chair. He carried it by its back while remaining totally straight-backed and head front like them pictures of them gods. What god? The Queen. Okay, so then you've got little footnotes here. Good afternoon, Mr. Mahesh, I says. Just Mahesh, please, Jane, says Mahesh. He knows my name. I feel my face going pink. I wanted to say something to talk to him, but I wasn't sure what. How'd you like England, I says. This is my first time here, he says. It is very beautiful, but most cold. Cold, I says. It gets much colder than this. Do you have trees in India? He smiled and looked even more handsome. We do, Jane. We have trees in the jungle and in the forests and in the plantations too. Grow timber for the empire. At the logging camps, much of the felled trees are carried by elephants. My eyes widened. Elephants? Have you seen an elephant? I says. Many elephants, he says, but only one tiger. It attacked my village when I was a boy. I was about to ask him more when his master, the major, came into the room. The major totally ignored me as if I weren't there. Happy with the arrangements, Mahesh? He says. Most satisfied, Major. Jane has been most helpful. Good, good, said the Major, not even turning to look at me. Long John's was right about that moustache. It looks like the brush from me dustpan and brush. I hurried back below below stairs, the charred piece of paper safely tucked out of sight. When I had the chance, I showed the scrap of paper to Jack. I didn't just show it to him because he's had more schooling than most, or better schooling at least. I showed it to him to prove to myself that I trusts him. What you reckon this is? I says. He took the piece of burnt paper and studied it carefully. It looks like the remains of a receipt to me, he says. That word oppie is probably actually copy. And I reckon rom is probably from. His eyes widened. You know what you found, Jane? I nodded slowly. Someone paid to have a copy of the jade necklace made out of something called soapstone, which means that the necklace the sweep found up the chimney ain't the original that was stolen, says Jack. Keep your voice down, I urges him. The thief must have stolen the jade necklace, had a cheap copy made, then sold the original and put the copy there to be found so the search is called off. That's ingenious, that is, says Jack. But what do you do now? I stuff the charge receipt away again. I ain't got no idea, I says. At supper in the servants' hall that evening, I turned to Mr. Pritchard, who was seated at the head of the table, and says, Mr. Pritchard, would you please tell me what soapstone is? Soapstone, says Mr. Pritchard, is a pleasing greenish stone, often carved into ornaments. Mr. Kirby Trott has a collection of such objects, of the smaller variety that he collected in his childhood, carved frogs and the such like. I suspect you are familiar with it, Mahesh. The beautiful Indian looked up and nodded. Oh, yes, Mr. Pritchard, he says, we have much soapstone in India and some very fine carvers. Why do you ask, Jane? I'd heard talk of it, I says, and we're wondering if it had to do with soap, Mr. Pritchard. Mr. Pritchard smiled. No, he says, and the conversation turned to another matter. So, Pankhurst, if you look at this, the layout of this chapter has been very different. Okay, you've had random big words in the middle. Okay, and with some of these words, you've had numbers over there. Okay, and then these numbers have been written at the bottom here, and those are footnotes. They tell you what that word means. So if you look at number 76, where it says with a dip pen, it says 76. Quill pens made from feathers were still used in Victorian times, but less and less as her reign continued. Then came dip pens with nibs at the end of a handle, which, like a quill, could be dipped in ink. So basically, at the bottom over here, some information for the numbered footnotes that you have. Okay, so now what I just have a quick look at this layout. Yeah, quickly. Let's see what else was different. Now, can you just discuss with your teddy or with your adult, how did the set out of these pages look different? Pause the screen and discuss it now. And when you're ready, come back. All right, fantastic. So with this story, you had little numbers next to some words, and then at the bottom, those numbers gave you a description or some information on what that word meant. Now, we're going to go through our key vocabulary for this text and this unit. Okay, so the first word is extraordinary. So my turn, then your turn. Extraordinary. This is something that is unusual or very amazing. Okay. Correspondence. Correspondence. This is communication by exchanging letters. Dictates. Dictates. It is to say or read aloud words to be typed or written down by someone else. Chalk on slate. Chalk on slate. In the Victorian period, paper was expensive, and so children would do their work on slate with chalk, like a blackboard. Dip pen. Dip pen. A pen with a nib that you dip into ink in order to be able to write. And these type of pens were usually used in history in the past, okay? Fountain pen. Fountain pen. A pen with a cartridge from which ink flows continuously to the nib. Assist. Assist. To help someone. Letterhead. Letterhead. A printed heading on stationery stating a person or company's name and address. So for example, you know, sometimes when your parents get letters from school, on your letter there will be a letterhead which tells you that is from the Langley Academy Primary. Okay. Inkwells. Inkwells. A pot usually made of glass or silver which held ink in a place convenient for a person who is writing. Some desks had holes for inkwells to sit in. So it's a little pot where you get your dip pen and you dip it in. So it's a pot which stores the ink. Monotonous. Monotonous. Something that is dull, boring, and repetitive. Okay? Now, what we are going to do is learn our text map. So Miss Gossage has kindly recorded it for you, and I will play it for you in a second. And what I would like you to do is, once you have seen her do it, and once you have watched her actions and how she does the text map, I'd like you to practice this whenever you get time throughout the week. Not just once, just practice it as much as you can. Okay, I am going to share the video with you now, so if you just bear with me a second.
Day 46. This has been a most extraordinary day. Mr. Sherlock Holmes himself couldn't have done better. The master's brother, Major Kirby Trott, has asked us to use a certain room as his study while he's here, not wanting to do his correspondence and such like in the family library. Apparently, he dictates his letters to Mahesh rather than writes them himself. Dictates means that he says what he wants to say in his letters and Mahesh writes them for him. Like I does with Plump for this diary. Never knew I was dictating. Turns out Mahesh can write better English than what most of us downstairs can. Except, of course, Mr. Pritchard, and in the most beautiful writing too. The only writing I've ever done is with chalk and slate or in pencil on a scrap piece of paper, and once with a dip pen. But Mahesh uses something called a fountain pen. It doesn't spurt like a fountain, though I bet I'd get blotches and splodges and the like all over me and the paper if I tried. But the ink flows regular from it and, in Mahesh's hand, the end result is beautiful. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was ordered to assist Mahesh in preparing the room as a study. I was told to gather any papers I found with writing on them and put them aside for the master, and to provide plenty of paper with the Lytton House letterhead, as well as make sure that the inkwells were full and the like. I wasn't sure why me. I mean, yes, the room is on the ground floor, where all the rooms, what are my responsibility, are found. But why couldn't Mahesh do it? Not that I minded. I like a change. I heard poor old Jack use a word the other day when he were asked what it was like being on unpaid light duties, what with his broken leg. He told them it was monotonous. And when I asked Cook what he meant, she told me it means doing the same boring stuff day in, day out, which just about describes me life.
Okay, so thank you for that, Miss Gossage. Okay, so now your task today is to write a sentence using each of our new key vocabulary words. Do not forget to upload your work to Tapestry. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a list for you on the next page where all your vocabulary is on it, and then you can just pause on that screen and write it for each sentence. Okay, if you just pause the screen now. So here are your keywords from this lesson, and what I would like you to do is write them in a sentence and upload your work to Tapestry. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you do amazing sentences, and I'm looking forward to seeing your work on Tapestry. Goodbye, Pankhurst.